Hi, this is Yavi Caro. I'm an organizational psychology practitioner and team and management coach. And welcome to the Hardcore Soft Skills podcast. Today, we have a live session recorded via LinkedIn where I speak with author Andrew Hobday about two of my favorite things agility and psychology. Now, let me give a quick disclaimer. The audio at times in this episode is a bit choppy since I was having some internet issues, so I apologize in advance. But the conversation is very good, and you will get, as always, practical advice to implement now in your organization to achieve true agility. Now, let's listen. All right. And I think we are live. Wonderful. Welcome to the Hardcore Soft Skills podcast. And we're here in another LinkedIn Live episode. And I have here joining me I'm in Tampa, Florida, and he's on the other side of the world from Australia. The day is almost over. He's living in the future. Andrew Hobday, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Yeah, it's a late at night here, but yeah, it's great that we found a good time that we can both make it online.
Exactly. Yeah. We've been trying this for a while in terms of like what the right balance of getting together. So I'm glad we're
Yeah.
finally able, like early morning for me, late night for you, still on the same day. So it's so wonderful. And Andrew is an author, he's a speaker, and we're going to talk a lot about his book, specifically Psychology Driven Agility, Mastering Human Dynamics for Business Success. And you've addressed the topics that I love, which are agility and psychology. And I have so many questions because after reading the book, it's a lot of great information and specific tactics that you provide about making true transformation in the organizations. But before that, tell us a little bit about yourself, Andrew, because you've been a coach as well and working in organizations.
Yeah. So I've sort of done a little bit of work there in analysis and agility, and then more recently expanded into this concept of business agility, where the way I define it is gaining sort of deep insight, whether that's internal or external to the organization, and then using that to drive intelligent decisions, and then using those decisions to uh, basically go and rapidly implement something, not haphazardly, but rapidly, and before those decisions get stale. So it's all about kind of moving through those different things. So it applies a lot more broadly than what people might hear when they sort of talk about agile. A lot of people talk about agile methodology for delivery, but this is sort of all whole of business, and very much bridges into the human mind and psychology as well. So that's what I've been really interested in now, and it goes back to, and I know you've studied psychology as well. It goes back to studying psychology and just realizing that there's this human element in everything, and uh, pondering why things are the way they are in a workplace, and realizing actually there's a lot to do with the humans in a workplace, as you realize it. It seems obvious once you work it out, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, yeah, when we think, as you say, of the agility and agile frameworks, we talk a lot about, working in teams and organizations and having those specific roles of people that are going to implement the particular agile framework. And what you're referring to is like a bigger view of like we really want to be like big agile in terms of the organization, business as a whole becoming agile per se, and that's very important when you mention about the psychology aspect, because when it comes to agility, I've seen a lot the focus in organizations is about the processes. Are you following
Mm,
sprints? Are you following PI planning? Are you having the roles, story points, like those metrics?
mm,
But in order to execute that is the psychology part.
mm.
How do you realize that to bring true transformation to an organization, it's a lot about the human aspect.
Mm. Yeah, I think, and I define, and different people in this sort of topic define things differently, but I define what you just kind of described as the mechanical stuff as um, enterprise agility. So it's the mechanics of planning, and then teams of teams planning, and then doing certain things, and making sure there's enabler teams that are delivering parts and that kind of thing. And then business agility, I think of as more the human interface. So it really, um, if we don't have the draw the insights and then make decisions based on that, for example, then we can have all the mechanics in place, and we can have the processes and the tools could be best of breed, and everyone's using them and everything. But we've missed the whole point. We've made something very efficiently, but we've made the wrong thing. So we want to be making sure we're making the right thing and then making it well. And when we kind of ask ourselves, well, what went wrong there? We had a good team and we were all doing what we thought we were meant to be doing. What was the missing piece? And that's where a lot of the time it comes back to um, people and human behaviors and things. It's what we hear at the water cooler, or walking back to the subway or whatever. People are talking about stuff, and a lot of time they're talking about people and dynamics of people, and what they don't like about the team, or what went wrong with somebody who didn't seem to understand what was going on, or still made a decision when they shouldn't have. All those kind of discussions, and a lot of those stem from just the human condition.
Yeah, and in the book, you've also talked about the specifics of those aspects. So, for example, in organizations that are trying to transform into agility, the part of the authority, because usually organizations, and particularly myself working in military, organizations have been the kind of very hierarchical organization, and all these levels of authority. And I love the fact that you talk about it, the concept of distributed authority. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I think of sort of these roughly three different options. There's command and control. So it's really master apprentice style. The master's going to tell the apprentice what, well, they probably won't even say why they're doing it, but they say, what it is and how they're going to do it. And then the apprentice just hands and feet essentially. And then, if they're lucky, they might become a master in the future and have an apprentice of their own. Um, then there's um, then there's delegated authority, which is probably what people think is like what is the way you want to go. They think, oh, yeah, that sounds pretty good. You're delegating it out to people. But what I find with delegated authority is things can be already pre-solved. So there's not a lot of authority that goes with it, or it's rigid, or it's ambiguous, or there's constantly this sort of vetoing factor where someone can come along and do the shoulder check and just totally change it, or maybe there's this sort of blame likely burden where you've got this sort of poison chalice almost, that if you do make the decision, you're damned, and if you don't make it, you're damned. So I've seen a lot of that with, I guess, delegated authority, and it has this sense of being able to pull it back whenever. It's never really sort of solid, and people don't have the confidence. And then we get to distributed authority, which is um, where people have been empowered to make these decisions, and in order for that to work, there needs to be an understanding of what they're trying to get at with those decisions. Like, they can't be sort of hollow, just making them for making them sake. So to set someone up right, and a lot of this is about setting people up right to do whatever it is, whatever part that makes sense and adds value, and they need to understand the strategic intent and the purpose and the vision, and to be able to then make a decision in their situation. And the beauty of someone having distributed authority is they're typically the one closest to the action. So they're at the front line, or they're where the customer call is, or and they've got the most context, because if we go up the hierarchy and back down again, we lose context as we go up each layer, and it takes time, and it's slow moving, and it sometimes pasteurizes and homogenizes as it goes up. If we've ever seen the careful wording as we put this, this kind of this message up for a decision, we're almost stage managing it, and then the people making the decision at the top are really, maybe they're making it based on something that almost you could say is false information, and then it's coming back down. But particularly, I think I did a military example in the a historic one in the book about basically some leaders that didn't want to hear the front line. They were losing the battle, so they were making decisions based on, yep, everything's going well, we're winning, and of course, very different decisions you'd make if you heard that compared to, hey, we're losing people fast and we need to really do something here. So they, at the front line, you're in the action. You now have this sort of strategic intent. You know the purpose. You know what's going on. You've got that clarity of purpose. And then the other thing is the guardrails. So no one's without some bounds. So it's around saying, here are some clear guardrails. There's plenty of liberty in there to make good decisions. You don't want to make it so narrow it's like going down a water slide. You can go down, but just go down exactly this way. There's some scope, but it's quite clear, because if you start being very flaky and say, oh, just don't spend too much, someone goes, well, what does that mean? Like, and then they've got to refer again for a decision. So it needs to be clear. So within there, they can do what makes sense for the situation, and there'll be some um, guidance within there, some guidelines, so policies a company might have, but it's for them to then incorporate. And there's a couple of other things they need. One is, well, they've got to take the accountability, because if they don't, they even set precedents then for others who have distributed authority, that are they safe then to take that authority? They have to be able to get some support. So they might be making some decisions where they say, oh, I'd like to soundboard this to someone. They might even want to do that with their manager, but it doesn't mean the manager just takes over the decision. At the end of that discussion, they say, okay, well, have you got everything you need from me? Okay, go and make that great decision now, so it doesn't automatically get taken off them. And if there is something where they make a decision that could have been better and something goes a little wrong, it needs to be an environment where it is safe to fail a little bit, as long as you're learning, because otherwise no one's going to take that authority, and you're sort of stuck with the older way of doing things. But very powerful when it's done well, and people are supported to do it, and people see the benefit of it. But it has to be done in the right way, that there's the scaffolding and the support. Otherwise, it falls apart pretty quickly, and it just sort of, in inverted commas, proves it to the ones that were a little skeptical at the start that it doesn't work, because they've set it up to fail, kind of thing.
Yeah, so very important, as you mentioned, to elements you mentioned of having that clear goals and the vision, having the guardrails as well, because it's like just go do the thing. It's having
Yeah.
those good guardrails is important too, and to allow people that are, as you say, close to the action, because yeah, it gets diluted as you go above the chain, in terms of which action to take. And I love the fact that you mentioned about the establishing that ability, acceptance of failure, which I think is very, one of the key topics that are very, organizations, they want and assume that, yeah, we innovate, we do all these things, but when it comes to failure, is that fear
Mm.
of
Yeah.
failing as well. And so, and how do you, let's talk about that, about the ability to fail. What have you seen, or what are some actions that, if as we managers, can we take to feel a little bit more comfortable with that, that space of like, hey, it didn't go well this time, but let's go ahead and make it a little bit more, it's not the world is not ending if it didn't go well. How do we
Yeah.
cultivate that?
So I think one of the helpful things is to think about, how do you chunk things down or break things down into smaller pieces, and it contains your blast radius. If you've got this one big decision or this one big program of work that's like a 3-year program, a multi-billion-dollar thing, and it never gets chunked down into smaller pieces, then the decisions can be really big, and it can be catastrophic. But if you break things down and you create the value incrementally and iteratively, then if something goes wrong, it's a small blast. and the fallout is less. So if we look at the way in which we're trying to achieve certain strategic goals and we break them down sufficiently, then what have we ever lost? We've lost no more than X amount of time or no more than X amount of dollars. And we've got to set that. We've got to get a risk appetite from the executive or whoever's sponsoring things. And we've got to then work out, well, what does that mean for us when we do those mechanics, like the planning and breaking things down? And we've got to be clear about that with everybody too. So everyone's working from the same page. Everyone understands the limits of what there is in terms of funding and budget and what to kind of do. So no one's biting off more than they can chew. But I think that's where it really, that's one of the biggest differences is if you keep things really big and they're risky and they seem really exciting, but if they go wrong, they go really wrong. If you break them down, then you've got stop losses. You're not really losing too much because you've created these smaller pieces that, as long as they're aligned strategically to where you want to go, then you can pivot and pause and persist, or you can make these decisions along the way and go, okay, do we? Because sometimes what will happen is people don't pause and just work out whether they should continue down that path, and so they might have done smaller things, but they just keep trucking along with 50 small things and then realize, oh no, hang on, we've gone the wrong way, and that becomes a big blast. So it's important at each stage to have these sort of checkpoints to think, okay, well, do we continue with this? Do we pause? Do we pivot? Do we scale it out already? And it's not only about that particular thing you're trying to do, that initiative, it's about that compared to the other things you could be doing. So you might say, well, we're doing the third release of this digital piece or whatever. Is it now best to do the fourth release, or do we do the second release or the 58th release of something else? So it's always kind of the trade-offs between what would this funding do here versus in somewhere else, and you don't get that unless you stop and think about that. If you just do an annual land grab for funding and then just go and squirrel it away and do a very siloed approach to spend, you never really get that opportunity, or in a very narrow way against a few other things you might be in control of in your silo. But if you broaden it out a bit, you can then always be contrasting and comparing to other things, and that's where you get the most value in an organization.
Yeah, and you've expressed the critical aspect of one of the key things when we work in agile teams, which is like the small iterations and making
Mm,
the point that it's not just about like working in small iterations and giving the team a break or anything like that. It's more like that willingness. It allows the organization to make those mistakes if mistakes happen at a very
mm,
small level, take those lessons learned and then implement in the next iteration.
mm,
So great points on that, on how to um, create the infrastructure, let's say, of for accepting failure.
mm,
Um, w- One of the things as well that you've that I've enjoyed and was make me think a lot while reading the book. It was the role of biases. When it comes to trying to implement big transformations, and you talk in detail about a lot of different biases, but mention a couple
mm,
of organizational or just human biases that we have that could impede our path towards transformation and agility.
mm. And yeah, so what I was trying to do with biases, because there's over 200 of these things,
Wow.
and I was trying to draw from like years of behavioral observation and looking at how things had gone wrong or how things had gone right, and then boil it down to a reasonable amount. These are the ones I see impacting a lot, and I think that's what others should do too. Really, is because trying to learn 200 and some weird and bizarre different ones that you might never see crop up. It's probably better to become familiar with and understand a dozen or so, spot them in action in yourself and in others, and then work out how to counterbalance them. But for example, there some of the things we see the Dunning-Kruger effect. We see these people with a very little bit of experience that then don't realize they don't know what they don't know, and they get a little bit confident. we see that. Oh, well, we saw that in the COVID days as well. We saw people that all of a sudden they sound like they're immunologists or something, and they just sort of read a couple of
Mm.
articles and they knew better than trained doctors, and it just sort of happens, and everyone's sort of susceptible to it. It can happen to kind of anyone. So in those cases, it might be there's some ideas, and if you set up an opportunity forum with a cross-functional group of people, and you're going to have people that have got some expertise in different things in that forum. If you've got an idea coming through from someone, it can be very much moderated then by a group that kind of sort of says, "Hang on a minute, we've got to consider a few things." So it's not a mechanism to slow down or just dampen everything. It's a way of being able to say, well, here's one person. I stand in a certain place. I've got certain vantage points. I've got certain perspectives. If you've got several people in a forum, you've got a some kind of opportunity canvas or some kind of canvas where you're saying, yeah, here's what we're on about today. Here's let's make sense of it. And you've got a whole lot of different minds in the room. That's gonna really squash the Dunning-Kruger effect. You're going to have people that really know this stuff, and they're going to go, um, you got sort of status quo bias. We're very much tuned to just leaving things run, let the
Mm.
status quo prevail. So it catches us out, I guess, when we opt for, when we're signing up for something, we opt for the automatic renewal, and then we never have this trigger point to go, are we getting the value out of it? And that happens to anyone who's got a cost center and who has certain software or whatever they might have. And so each year or whenever the billing period is, they'd take a pause and actually have just a simple calendar function. They go in, they say, okay, what value have I got from this in the last billing period?
Mm.
What could I have been spending on? So again, it's like that breaking things down and going, well, am I better to go with that again, or do I ratchet up something else, or whatever it might be? Um, so we have to give ourselves opportunities to challenge these biases
Yeah.
at the right moments, and so it's not rocket science. It's putting interventions in that make a lot of sense in themselves already. Because one of the things I've found with business agility, if you ask a bunch of people, say a bunch of executives, for a whole bunch of faith, just go with this. I can't explain how it works. It doesn't look like it's got value on the surface, but just trust me. And then in 2 years' time, you'll see an amazing company. They probably won't. So you got to sort of provide things that are counterbalances to biases, but also have their own value in them. Things that make a lot of sense. Like you might say, well, we're dealing with hindsight bias. We've got this person, this manager that comes along and says, you should have known that. Everyone could have known that. You should have guessed that. Well, in that case, um, rather useful would be a pre-mortem or a risk workshop. So in a pre-mortem,
Mm.
we say, imagine everything went wrong. Imagine
Yeah.
this thing absolutely tanked. Why did that happen? How did that happen? And then people start to say, oh, well, this happened, or we didn't do this, or we didn't do the stakeholder, we didn't check the stakeholders, or we didn't do the comms plan. And so they come up with all that beforehand. So that poor project manager or delivery manager that gets this role, they've had a bunch of people talking about these things, and then if something does go wrong, and they manage it the best they can, they're not going to get this sort of pesky person come in and say, "Oh, you should have known." So
Yeah.
we're setting them up in a way where we're taking the wind out of the sails of that hindsight bias, because it's a horrible one to have someone come at you with, because
I
and
know.
even
Yeah. Mm.
it's like the agile prime directive, where it says, we believe we did the best we could given what we knew and what was happening at the time, and it's a really nice way to start a retrospective, to look back on things, to sort of say, well, we all did the best we could, and we believe that that's the case, and let's just look at this constructively rather than you should have known, or I would have done this, or anyone would have done that. That's
Mm-hmm.
really that's horrible.
Yeah, it doesn't help the moving along the conversation, and I love that concept of the not the postmortem, which is in traditional project management you're used to in
Mm.
terms of like we finished the project, now let's look at how it all went.
Yep.
It's the pre-mortem, like let's think about the worst case scenario here and prepare for those things because it gives a lot of possibilities
Mm.
and then you could say really like yes we thought about every possible thing, but of course it could be stuff that's happened, but yeah, that's a great concept to have. And aside from the regular retrospectives too. Now, in since this podcast is all about soft skills and how can we improve in those quote unquote soft skills, you talk a lot about the collaboration,
Mm.
curiosity, empathy. I'm interested in those, and what do you suggest in terms of key ways to improve collaboration in an organization? Because you talked about good collaboration and when there's too much or there's too little
Mm.
collaboration, when there is when is it good to have collaboration, or when is it uh, when what is a scenario that collaboration is like too much collaboration is not good
Mm.
for an organization?
Yeah, so I've got a model for business agility, and for deep insight, um, you need curiosity and collaboration. So I think one of the times when it can be unhelpful is if you have collaboration without curiosity. So if you imagine people, they aren't that curious, they're not really looking to progress something forward or necessarily, and they're just collaborating, then you end up, yeah, it's more of a social thing. If you've got a whole lot of curiosity but you're not collaborating, then you're fixed to, well, whatever you could find out. So you're not, not getting the benefit of others. But I find that one of the things to build collaboration is to think of building bridges and not walls. So what some leaders and managers may do for their teams is sometimes they're trying to deflect things. They're trying to keep them cocooned a little bit so they can get their work done. But some really great leaders will build a bunch of bridges to other teams. They'll invite other team members and leaders to come in and just talk about their area. They might soundboard off another team that maybe not doesn't have anything to do with whatever they're working or the actual team's working on, but just as a different perspective. And these kind of things build that trust and that collaboration and just build a deeper appreciation for other perspectives, and that can be really helpful for valuable collaboration that gets somewhere in terms of innovation and business value.
Yeah, that concept of the building bridges and not walls, and thinking having that framework of when we go to collaborate, it's not just about getting together, it's about how do we increase the benefit, the mutual benefit for ourselves and for the organization too. Now let's talk about empathy. What is how are good scenarios of
Mm.
empathy, implementing a more empathetic view in the organization? And I guess that would align as well with the concept of design thinking. Could you talk a bit about empathy in the organization and how can we cultivate it?
Mm. So empathy, as you know really well, it's about the active listening and trying to understand the position of others and their backgrounds and what their perspectives and what they're dealing with. Um, so one of the things that I've seen work really well is an empathy safari where you're trying to kind of understand people in their natural habitat. So an example, years ago, I had a look at it was a call center team that was using 17 different systems to do their calls. And on paper, it sounded like, oh, okay, but you couldn't imagine that they were using all 17 for one particular call and that systems were stopping and then they had to copy and paste from one into another. And that really gave you the empathy of the situation. But the other thing that I warn against in the book is that empathy, I feel, degrades over time. It has a short half-life. We can all of a sudden lose our empathy for something. We might have been on the front line in the call center. Now we're a supervisor or a manager. We haven't done calls for a couple of years. Oh, it can't be that bad. It wasn't that bad. I didn't find it that bad. Yeah, well, all of a sudden we have a bit of a disconnect. So we've got to keep refreshing that. Um, and that's really important because we can adopt a different perspective. And we still have, I guess, that arrogance around, oh, we know the role, but we haven't been in it for a while, and the empathy really, from what I've found, I've seen, it can really die down. So you've got to kind of go back and actually saddle up and listen to another call, for example, just to keep that empathy going for people.
That's wonderful. That's great advice. And thank you so much for all the information. And I highly recommend, of course, the viewers here and listeners to take a look at your book with all the specific information about how to really encourage business agility in an organization. And what are the best ways if people have more questions or just want to reach out to you? What's the best way to do so?
I'd say, so my website, that's got the details of the book. So that's simply andrewhobday.com. Check out the website. You can contact me through that as well. And then LinkedIn. So always happy to link in with people and have a chat. I love to talk about this stuff. So anything psychology and business agility, I'll happy to have a chat.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for being here on the podcast today, and for we finally are able to make the conversation happen. Thank you so much.
It was excellent. Thanks for having me.